Howdy y'all, welcome back. The history of the Northeast of America from pre-colonial times inspires much debate among scholars and casual researchers alike. Today, we will examine the oldest known photographs of New Hampshire, one of the smallest states in America, yet one that played a key role to the history of the landscape now known as New England. Without question, these earliest photographs of New Hampshire reveal centuries of indigenous occupation that could still be witnessed in the very foundations and infrastructure that shaped all of the major cities and settlements. In this glorious collection of photographs, we will begin to unravel the true nature of the American Northeast, showcased through the many important strategic locations highlighted as founded or previously occupied by the indigenous people. And even as the province of New Hampshire became strictly controlled by the Iron Thumb of England, we can also see that New Hampshire was promoted to one of the textile capitals of the New World. I'll try to include the titles and dates for each image today, when applicable, and as with many of the oldest photographs in history, what survives today are largely of the stereoscopic variety. As we examine the photographs, we will also attempt to decipher the current narrative history, beginning with the myths, legends, and history that's related to indigenous occupation. As this is the currently accepted history, take it all with a grain of salt as we attempt to read between the lines. The land of New Hampshire was first occupied by European settlers in the early 1620s, with a majority of these small villages situated around the Great Bay. In the year 1622, the English crown issued permanent land grants, with much of the land that today makes up New Hampshire being granted to John Mason. Interestingly, John Mason appears to be a rather mysterious figure. Born in 1586 in the market and merchant town of Kingsland, Norfolk, England, the only detail of any gravity about John Mason's early life is that he was educated at Peterhouse in the University of Cambridge, Peterhouse being the oldest offshoot of the University of Cambridge, founded the whole way back in 1284. We're told in 1610, at the ripe age of 24, John Mason was somehow appointed captain of the expedition to reclaim the southern Isles of Scotland from the Gaelic-speaking clans that were being supported there by the Dutch. Although John Mason came out victorious, he was granted exclusive rights to the entire North Sea by the British Crown. However, the Dutch and the Scots both viewed John Mason as a pirate, and by the year 1615, he was arrested for piracy by the VOC. Miraculously, these Dutch forces released Mason, and the British very quickly hired him to sail to the New World to become the governor of Newfoundland in the year 1616. Mason chartered the land, created the first detailed map of Newfoundland, then sailed back to England, and when he arrived there, he claimed that he also wanted to settle Nova Scotia. So John Mason then sailed back to the New World on behalf of England, colonized Nova Scotia, and afterwards he was granted the land of New Hampshire in the 1622 land patents and grants that I mentioned earlier. After disputes over the borders with Maine, an official ruling was made in 1629 creating the province of New Hampshire. What's even more remarkable, John Mason is considered to be the founder of New Hampshire, as well as the one who chose the name based off the English county of Hampshire. Yet what most historians fail to recognize is that John Mason never actually stepped foot in the land of New Hampshire. He essentially claimed or founded New Hampshire and named it without ever stepping foot in the territory, which makes even less sense when we consider the fact that John Mason actually lived until 1635, meaning from roughly 1622 through 1635, we're told one of the most seasoned explorers out of England who made large-scale trips from England to the New World and back in less than 1 year was unable to travel from Nova Scotia to New Hampshire over the course of 13 years while he essentially owned the land. Rather strange, is it not? However, the root cause to this may actually be seen in the very essence of the earliest history of New Hampshire, the rather expansive and advanced indigenous people who dominated this landscape, known as the Abenaki or Wabanaki. I don't want to wax too deeply into the Abenaki. However, some of the surface level details seem to allude to a much deeper history that's rooted in the very core of the land itself. A multitude of different indigenous sites throughout New Hampshire appear to show evidence of centuries old construction. The name Abenaki derives from Wabanaki, meaning people of the dawning or rising sun. However, historically, the Abenaki people referred to themselves as the Anopek, meaning the real people. Worth note, Anopek in the similar Lenape language is Lenapek, which many believe the name Lenape derives from. Besides their vast ties to other indigenous cultures, there is also evidence that the Abenaki predated many of these other cultures and may have been the progenitors for many of the customs and traditions that became commonplace in New England. For example, early depictions show the Abenaki as well-dressed, well-groomed, and with many features which scholars today may describe as Scythian, but what we may call Tartarian. Beyond that, the Abenaki were an Algonquin-speaking woodland people who were said to be in direct conflict with the Iroquois-speaking tribes to the southwest, including decisive battles along the Susquehanna River with the infamous Susquehannock. We're also told the Susquehannock lived an imperial type of lifestyle with strict routine based around the cultivation of corn, beans, and squash, also referred to throughout early American history as the Three Sisters. This imperial type of lifestyle of the Susquehannock society, complete with massive fortified and palisaded earthworks, is often compared to Rome, which I found to be fascinating, especially when you consider the research that I shared with you about the Susquehannock and their possible ties to Greece. Take all the history with a grain of salt, but the Jesuit Relations, a journal published annually from 1632 through 1673, describes the Abenaki as the most docile and ingenious of the indigenous people who not only dressed modestly, but they also cultivated a vast assortment of mushrooms which the Europeans found to be delectable. The Abenaki also had specific inherited lands passed on through their family lines, and their homes were often large domed wigwams for the smaller families and larger oval-shaped longhouses for the more robust and important families. The Abenaki were said to be members, if not founders, of the train of thought today known as the Great Medicine Society, which comprised most of the tribes of New England. The Abenaki were then said to have been led by great medicine men as the most divine in their society. The Abenaki creation legend is also one that we have often heard versions of before, yet it appears the Abenaki legend may be the origin to these myths. According to the Abenaki legend, the Most High deity, known as Talbadak, meaning Lord, began to desire sound and color, and thus he spoke the world into existence. His voice summoned the great world turtle, called Toba, from the waters that separated the heavens and the earth. Talbadak then spoke land, sea, and atmosphere into existence on top of the shell of Toba, the great turtle. Exhausted from all of his creation, Talbadak fell asleep for 7 days. As he slept, he dreamt of every flora and fauna to have ever existed, and when he awoke, his dreams had become reality, and the newly created beings began to inhabit the world. As I love mythology and the symbolism it represents, looking into the Abenaki creation myth further, we're told Talbadak essentially does not interfere with the world once he created it, but instead Talbadak created Glooskap, who has helped the world transition through every great age. Glooskap is described as an angel-like or jinn-like being who is not a god, but possesses supernatural and godlike abilities which he uses to shape and benefit mankind. However, Glooskap is interestingly obsessed with vengeance or making things right, and appears to be, in theory, very similar to the concept of karma. Glooskap is also said to be one of the Great Twins, with the other entity being known as Malsum, who seeks to destroy humankind. Again, this is already extremely interesting to me, but looking into this even one step further, we are told Glooskap has, so far, ushered the world into three major phases or ages, being the Ancient Age, where animals and humans were equal or the same, the Golden Age, when humans began to realize their abilities, and the Current Age, where humans are completely separate from nature. To me, that's very chilling. We have different minor deities that are described throughout the Abenaki creation legend, and some of them are of significance to us researching the Old World. Atosis was a reptilian humanoid shapeshifter who became the leading medicine man of the Abenaki, who in this myth, he used to convince people to allow themselves to be cooked for consumption. Atosis was punished for his deeds. We also have Kiwak, who was a giant humanoid creature who lived deep in the forests of New England and hunted humans for sport. We have Matgwas, the great earth rabbit, who was said to be the first of the medicine men and the progenitor of the Great Medicine Society. This one really threw me for a loop. We also have the Padogiic, also known as the Seven Thunders, or the seven extremely pale, golden, and red-haired brothers. These men were said to have wings and faces like eagles, who once inhabited the Great Lakes region, with their main kingdom being on Lake Champlain. These blonde birdmen were said to be the Abenaki thunder gods who created storms. Finally, diving into Glooskap or Glosskap even more, his name actually means the one who created himself, and he was said to be the first humanoid form on Earth. Originally, Glooskap did not have legs, so he dragged himself around the face of the earth, creating the mountains, the valleys, and the rivers. We're also told that Tolba, the earth turtle, was considered to be the uncle of Glooskap, while it was Glooskap's spiritual son, the mink spirit known as Musbas, who saved the Abenaki from the evil reptilian medicine men. Whew! That was a lot, but I found it to be fascinating. Looking back at the currently accepted history of New Hampshire, we're told small pockets of Abenaki or their ancestors had resided in the New Hampshire area for 12,000 years before the arrival of European settlers. And we're also told, unlike other indigenous groups, the Abenaki often stayed in one place, creating large cities where each family owned their own tract of land, leading to thousands of years of development of the same locations. We can only then imagine what the Abenaki cities looked like when the European settlers first arrived to New England. New Hampshire's geography placed it on the frontier between British and French colonies in North America, and it was for many years subjected to native claims, especially in the central and northern portions of the territory. Because of these factors, it was on the front lines of many major military conflicts, leading to the eradication of over 90% of the indigenous population by the end of the 1740s. New Hampshire was also home to a handful of some of the earliest star forts in America, including Fort William and Mary, which was the site of the only battle of the Revolutionary War which occurred on New Hampshire soil. Portsmouth, nearby the fort, was also the site of the last stand of the Abenaki Nation, who eventually surrendered here after decades of conflict. Interestingly, a historically unrecognized but monumentally important free colony was said to have been founded in northern New Hampshire in 1832. This colony, known as the Republic of the Indian Stream, was said to have been first established the whole way back in 1622 under the first land grant. The residents of the Republic of the Indian Stream claimed that Metacomet, the leading chief medicine man of the Abenaki, had taken the title of King Philip in 1622 and set up a large Abenaki community in northern New Hampshire, which remained largely unnoticed until the 1800s. We're also told the Republic of the Indian Stream gained full notoriety when the English settlers who had been promised the land through new grants merged with this ancient indigenous community and declared themselves to be a new, independent republic. This republic was short-lived, however, officially only from declaring independence in 1832 through the year 1835, and yet the Republic of the Indian Stream appears on the census of 1830, 2 years earlier. Again, there's way more questions here than we have answers, and these questions also touch on other fields of academia. In 1835, for example, in the city of Canaan, New Hampshire, named for Canaan, Connecticut, itself named for the biblical Canaan, in this small community in New Hampshire was founded the Noyes Academy, deemed to be the most radical school in the New World. It admitted all people for higher education, including women, freedmen, and indigenous people. All of these groups at the time were being ostracized in the American public. The fact that this institution was founded in the settlement of Canaan, of all places, only adds fuel to our questioning. And the narrative doesn't relent from giving us more to dive into. By 1855, the Know Nothing Party and their offshoot, the American Party, had gained control of the entire government of New Hampshire in a landslide victory. And honestly, the Know Nothing Party by name would appear to be on the side of the people, of the common man, to give us knowledge. But this couldn't have been further from the truth. The Know Nothing Party extended the waiting period for citizenship to slow down the growth of immigrant power. The Know Nothing Party reformed the state court to consolidate power. They also expanded the number and power of banks, many of which they were in control of. The Know Nothing Party strengthened corporations while they defeated a proposed 10-hour law that would help workers not to have to work over 10 hours a day. The Know Nothing Party focused on ancient architecture, describing it as unfit for modern society, and they looked to renovate most major parts of New Hampshire. Between 1884 and 1903, New Hampshire attracted many new immigrants after the Know Nothing Party fell out of power, with a majority being from French Canada. Joseph Laurent, considered to be one of the most influential Abenaki chiefs in modern history, moved his residence to New Hampshire, claiming it to be the classical home of the Abenaki. Here, Joseph Laurent translated the Abenaki language into English for the first time, setting up a massive trading post and also writing the first detailed history of the Abenaki. So if there are any inconsistencies or anomalies in the early narrative, we can begin to see when the rewriting of the narrative could have taken place. The textile mills, which dominated New Hampshire's economy since British occupation, were almost all closed down by the mid-20th century. As the textile mills fell out of usage, the population of New Hampshire transformed, becoming more directly linked to the economy of Greater New England, with an influx of wealthy individuals moving to New Hampshire in the late 20th century. New Hampshire is also, today, the location for the first political primary election for President of the United States.